Glenn Sturm, my friend, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you, John, for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I'm curious, Glenn, for those who meet you randomly, maybe in a grocery store or maybe at a hospital, maybe on an airplane, and they say, Glenn, what do you do? What do you do, Glenn? How do you respond to that these days?
The thing I'm most passionate about today is multidisciplinary cancer care teams and what it does for people. And it just changes everything. I'm lucky because by accident, I developed my own team shortly after being diagnosed.
Hmm.
And those people are all still with me. I'm in my 18th year of chemo now, and they're still with me. And I wouldn't be here, I don't think, without them. So that's what I'm most passionate about. And I want to make sure everybody in the country knows about it.
Glenn, what you're most passionate about is such an important deal that the way I normally begin these podcasts is I spend the first 10 or so minutes really getting to know the person as a kid and as an adolescent and as a young person and as a professional. And we could spend at least that much time getting to know you in any of those areas of your life. But it's the call that began to change your life. So here you are, you're an attorney, you're a pilot, you're an officer, you're a business leader, and then your life changes when you get the call. We take us back to that moment.
Well, first of all, it was a total shock. I was in the Atlanta airport at gate B13, flying to Raleigh, North Carolina to give a presentation. I was doing it for a partner who had rejoined our firm. And I'm up there, and my phone rang. And back in those days, you didn't get the number of spam calls we all get today. So I actually answered it. And it was a doctor. And she said, Glenn, biopsy results came back and they're positive for cancer. Well, this is a woman who I had done triathlon training with. And I know most of my partners in the workouts were MDs. And I
Hmm.
thought for a second, I said, oh, this is malarkey. This is a bad, bad practical joke. And I said, okay, who put you up to this? And she said, what do you mean, Glenn? I said, come on, we all know, was it David? And she said, Glenn, the biopsies came back. I said, what biopsies? I said, well, the ones we did in December. Well, this is January 21st, actually. And it's like, you got to be kidding me. And so it was like just out of the clear blue. And so I spent that day flying up and giving the speech that night. They told me I had to come back the next day for additional biopsies. And so they did additional biopsies, and within 3 days, they confirmed it. And they said I had to see a specialist because the type of cancer I've got is pretty rare. And it's an incurable type, but a fightable type. And so I flew out to see my wife at the time and my son. And then the following weekend, I did the same thing. And I was getting off the plane, and it was just a lot of confusion.
Right.
But I got off the plane and I walked down the stairs in Jackson, Wyoming. And I was so excited to see my little guy. It was black ice, and I slipped and fell and heard this loud pop. And I'd torn my ACL. And I'm sitting on the asphalt or concrete at the airport. And I'm saying, what else do I have to deal with? And at that time, something my daughter told me years before popped into my head. And she said to me one day, Dad, the ambulance is gone. And I'd been complaining about her car wreck. And she was right. I was wrong. And I was sitting there laying down. I said, look, I don't know how long I've got, but I'm going to make my life the best it can be for the rest of the time I've got.
Hmm.
And I got up, hobbled in. I ended up being MRI with a radiologist that had the worst knees he'd ever seen, but he didn't do the diagnosis. I got back to Atlanta a day or two later, and I had a torn ACL. And that was actually very beneficial because it helped put the cancer care team together. And how was that? I mean, the first person that was added initially was a psychiatrist because I'd gotten served with divorce papers. My dog had died, and my mentor had died, and my dad was very ill. And my GP said, you need to see a psychiatrist. And I did. And she's the second person, and she took care of helping me through a side effect of cancer called cancer fatigue syndrome, which I was diagnosed and ended up being diagnosed with narcolepsy as a result of the chemo and that. And so I got my energy back. But when I had the surgery, the insurance company approved physical therapy forever, basically. And every Friday, my physical therapist would take a picture of my skin and write a report to my principal oncologist. So there was this total communications loop almost immediately. And that, first of all, gave me a level of confidence that I didn't have before.
Right.
And secondly, it created a multidisciplinary team where people are looking at it from a different perspective.
Mm.
So that all came about because of that, coming off that airplane too fast and slipping on black ice and, tearing an ACL.
So, brother, you have a torn ACL, a cancer diagnosis, the diagnosis of, in finger quotes, incurable cancer.
Right.
And eventually, these physicians are going to tell you that, generally speaking, you probably have 2 years left to live.
Well, I never asked the question, but my daughter did. And my daughter was told 2.5. I had 2.5 years. And I never knew that until about 4 years ago
Okay.
because I didn't want to. I can't control that. I
Mm.
can control what I do. I can control my attitude. I can control what I can do for others. And if you spend your time helping others, it has an immense impact on you with cancer. There's a new study from Europe about quality of life and longevity. And basically, and this is being simplistic, but for every like 10% increase in your quality of life, you have a linear increase in longevity, no matter what kind of cancer you got.
Wow.
So,
So, talk about that for a moment. How do you increase your passion and your purpose behind life then? So, it seems like that's one of the things we should focus on.
well, it is. When I first started, I lost my job because I was doing big deals and stuff, and the insurance companies didn't want me doing billion-dollar transactions and missing something and causing
Mm.
everybody a lot of liability. So what was I going to do next? I can't sit still. Well, when I was 5 years old, we were living in Berlin, Germany, and Dad was an army officer, and he finally got 30 days leave. And my mom knew me well enough as a 5-year-old to know that our family was going to drive around Europe for 30 days in a Volkswagen Bug, and the backseat would be my two sisters, me, and a German Shepherd.
What year was this, Glenn?
58, 59.
Okay.
And so my mom said to herself, she said, if I don't give him something to keep his mind busy, he's going to kill one of the sisters. And so she bought me a new camera that had manual settings and taught me how to use it. And I started taking pictures. So I'd taken pictures my whole life. I always had decent cameras and things, but I decided I was going to spend time in Jackson, Wyoming, the most beautiful place I've ever been, doing photography. And so that was the first thing I got passionate about. And then we had this wonderful thing called a total solar eclipse right over Jackson, Wyoming. And I put a team together to shoot it. And we shot 9,400 images that day. We didn't know if we had a single good picture. Turned out we had a lot of good pictures and studied it for 3 years before it happened. And we knocked it out of the park. And that was, so I got passionate about that. So they call us umbraphiles. I chase eclipses all over the world. Okay, but those happen once a year. So what am I going to do the rest of my time? Well, I had a Caring Bridge website, and I wrote things about me and what was going on because I didn't want to talk to people about it. One of the fun things about cancer is people will ask you how you doing, and the correct answer is fine because that question is not a question; it's a greeting. And if
Mm.
you tell somebody about how you really are, they'll never ask you a question again. So they don't want to hear it. So if you just say fine, you can move on. And
So, can
so,
I ask you about that real quickly?
yeah,
Because a lot of my friends who do have cancer, or they do have a diagnosis of Parkinson's or MS, or they've
right.
lost a spouse, and I ask them, how are they doing? I do want to know sincerely. So, what is the better question that we ought to be asking our friends who are struggling? And we want to know where
Well,
they are, want to know how we can love them better.
that is the perfect dilemma because it requires judgment. That's the right question, but you have to know who's asking it. Is it a friend? Is it a good person? Or is it a person who's just an acquaintance? There's a person of mine named Randy. I met him at the University of Florida outside the bookstore. We sat there. When I got diagnosed with cancer, Randy was living in Utah. And the next morning, nobody ever rang my doorbell. My house was hard to get to. And my doorbell rang, and it was Randy. Randy flew the overnight to come see me to make sure I was okay. Now, a person like that, you have to do them the service of telling them what's going on because they really care. and you can't be superficial with them. But I used Caring Bridge to answer the question because everybody knew who went to my Caring Bridge site what was going on. And, but I always had humor in it because you want people to laugh. And that humor became my second book, which was Cancer Set Me Free. That was the basis for that. And then I got to write about eclipses and military history and my first novel, which is on hold at this second until I get the new cancer book out. I just started writing, and it turned out to be really beneficial to let me work through issues. And one of the things at the beginning of my book, I said the book's dedicated to those people who try to make the world a better place. And I love meeting those people.
Mm.
And we're hopefully doing a TED Talk in the near future about something that I learned in this process. When I was at the law firm, there were two of us who basically ran the firm, head of litigation and myself. And as you can imagine, in a big organization, there are conflicts about compensation for everybody, except for the two of you. One day I looked at David and I said, David, you and I never have disagreed when we had the same information. When we have different information, that's when we have problems. So I said, if we can agree on our information sources, we won't have arguments anymore. And about 6 months ago, I got an email from him, and then we talked, and he said that was the most important thing that happened to the firm, that conversation. So my son, who's the smartest guy I've ever met, and I would argue all the time. So we've got a new way of approaching things that I mandated. And that is we had to agree on everything we agreed on first. And once we agreed on everything we agreed on, then we could start working on areas where there were holes in our information. And after we filled those holes in our information out, we could figure out what, if anything, we really disagreed about. So we're working on a topic that a really smart guy who's on several TED Talks and I are going to have different perspectives on and try to zero sum game to look at a new way of conflict resolution. Again, just trying to make the world better, trying to help.
There's an expression that I've heard you use in several conversations, and I think it shows up in several of your books too. This idea of Sturms never quit. Tell me where that comes from and what does that mean to you?
It's actually more fundamental than that. My dad was an 18-year-old second lieutenant in World War II. Imagine he's a ranch kid, farm boy from Texas and Oklahoma, and he goes in the military and he does really well and he gets promoted and he goes to Europe and they make him a company commander at 18. Well, during the
Which, by the
battle
way,
of
is a hugely dangerous position in addition to an incredibly meaningful one to find yourself.
during the Battle of the Bulge, the battalion headquarters wiped out. And Dad is now a first lieutenant and assumes command at the age of 19 of an infantry battalion on the front line in the Battle of the Bulge. Dad didn't know how to quit, period. And so the Sturms never quit thing, it's not just don't quit. We don't know how to quit. It's just not in our DNA. And when you look at the military, the SEALs are the ones who talk about it. The Army, we don't talk about our stuff very often in the Army, but the SEALs make it really easy to ring the bell. It's so simple, okay? Because all they want to do is identify people who will quit. If you've got that and don't know how to quit or never quit in you, it just changes everything. And so I've got my dad to thank for it. And maybe my son would say to me that he wished my dad had never said that before, but I think it came from his dad too. But it's not a hill for a climber is another thing I love. If you decide you're going to climb a hill, you
That's a
climb
good
it.
one.
And then what I try to tell people is only you can stop you. Nobody else can stop you. You have to make a decision to stop. And the other thing is like decision by indecision. It's the worst decision of all. It's actually a decision when you don't decide something, where you're not going to address an issue.
Right.
So you actually have to decide and you have to make a decision what you're going to do. I'm so lucky. I mean, I'm so blessed. I had two of the greatest parents in the world, two grandfathers who were very different, but same way. My first mentor taught me the most important lesson of my life. And he was a 35-year-old guy, very successful, and his best friend's both the mom and dad died, and he ended up adopting 3 kids that were minors. And he told me one day, his name was Ray Daniel, and he's been gone for a while now. But Ray said, Glenn, he said, you're really smart, everything else. But if you don't learn how to get along with people, understand that people might not think things as quickly as you do. And if you're not as considerate to them, he said, I know you're a good guy, but you need to learn this lesson.
Mm.
And it was probably the most important thing ever. And then my next mentor was Dan Hodson. And he ran one of the largest law firms in the South for 30 years. And the last 10 years of his life, his office was right next to mine. And I mean, so I'm so blessed, it's kind of crazy. All these wonderful people, they all taught me the same thing. You know, only you can stop you, but you have to have your ears open and your mind open to everything.
Mm. You wrote a book called Cancer Set Me Free, which is an unusual concept. So my first question around that is, what did cancer set you free from?
Well, it's funny. It is probably the least asked question I've ever asked. But what happened was I had a great job. I was highly successful, living the dream. And my firm was so patient with me, they let me do anything almost. But it was like, you know, I had a new client one time, one of the biggest corporate raters in the world. He called me up on Sunday morning at 7:30 in the morning because he knew I was going to be in my office because he'd checked me out. Think about that, 7:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning, we were working. And what I wasn't doing was taking care of myself and the holes in my swing. I was so successful in some ways, there were holes everywhere. So when I had to quit working, I had time to contemplate what I'd missed, and it was a lot. And I was probably 3 or 4 months into that process of evaluation, and I sat down on a plane on a flight to Washington, D.C., and this large evangelical preacher had the seat next to me. So I was hunting for my headsets to put on, but I didn't want to spend the whole time. He said, how do kids spell love? I'll never forget this. He said, it's Time. Not quality, it's quantity. They want every second of your life. And if you give it to them, they'll be there forever. And boy, was that the smartest advice I ever got. So by getting cancer, I got to leave the 80-hour weeks. I got to focus on my kids and focus on helping others. And it's been the most rewarding thing you could ever imagine. I joke with people about it. It's been 18 years now since I've got a paycheck, but I'm still doing okay. And I'm, celebrating life every day. And I mean, how else do you describe that? By being set free.
You didn't know it, but you received a diagnosis of 2.5 years of life. You're now dancing toward your second decade of life since that decade. And you become, like it or not, an expert in this space of what to do after that diagnosis shows up. So, what's the very first thing that we patients should do when we hear the diagnosis cancer? What should we be asking our doctors?
Well, that's the reason I'm so passionate about this. I mean, the mortality rates for people with a multidisciplinary cancer care team, the survival statistics range from a 4% reduction in death to a 90% reduction in death over different cancers. So the question should be, the most important question should be, does the hospital and doctor I'm working with offer a multidisciplinary team? If they do, wonderful. Make sure it's real, not just in words. If they
How do you know
don't,
that? So
okay, well,
if they say, yes, we do.
well, you asked a couple questions. So I'm talking to one of my surgeons. I've had 55 surgeries, but he was talking and I said, when did you guys start doing multidisciplinary treatment? And he said, Glenn, who told you that? I mean, just snapped at me, like, asked me a hard question, like some kind of secret. I said, well, you said this, and this, and that means to me you're doing multidisciplinary. He said, you said nobody told you, you just figured it out. I said, yeah. He said, well, it's really hard. Who's supposed to be on the team? I said, go to email and look at the email I just sent you. And it was a list of the people on a multidisciplinary team, the specialties you need. And at the time, it was 43 or 44, and there are now 50 specialties. And so who are all these people on a multidisciplinary team? Well, you start with your oncologist, I think the second person needs a psychiatrist. And the last person that you'll probably want is an art therapist,
Mm.
but it's everybody in between. And if the place doesn't have something called a multidisciplinary team meetings, if they call it a tumor board meeting, it's not multidisciplinary. If you think about it, a multidisciplinary team works at consensus in trying to identify the best way to treat something. A tumor board is when you go and tell somebody how you're going to treat something.
Yeah.
And multidisciplinary, the results are just staggering. I mean, some people say the reduction in death rates is at least 10% at the worst case. And, I know I ran mine under the new models, and my life expectancy is now over 30 years instead of 2
Mm.
because of this approach. There's a question in my memorandum on multidisciplinary teams, and it basically says, as a patient, you should ask, do you have a multidisciplinary practice yet? Question 2, how often do you do your multidisciplinary team meetings? And then you ask, are patients permitted to participate in that? Is it a patient-centered approach? Well, if you don't have those questions answered right, you ask, where can I go to get that type of treatment? Recently, a friend of mine came to me. He said to me, my daughter's been diagnosed, 25-year-old, with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. He said, Glenn, where should she go? So I said, okay, drop everything. I had this happen last week with a friend with an acquaintance, or a friend of mine's acquaintance, his best friend was pancreatic cancer, so I had to go to work to find out who I thought was the best. And he said, Glenn, is it possible to have the best in California? And so I spent like 5 days researching it. And it turned out that I think that the best cancer program in the country is at the University of San Francisco. I've never been with them. I've never talked to them, but the research I did showed they have a true multidisciplinary approach in their breast cancer group. And it's a real team meeting. They follow all the steps that you're supposed to follow. And that's a good example of what it should be like if you go to their website and see how they do it. The real question you should ask the patient and the institution and the doctor is, are you providing a fully integrated multidisciplinary team? Well, where I live, there's no way they could do it because we have one oncologist and they do a good job of getting palliative care help, but they don't have other people to challenge the diagnoses. And it's not negative challenging, it's positive. It's just trying to
Right.
get to the best results. So how often in multidisciplinary do those results of the diagnosis or the treatment change? Well, it's about 33 to 35% times the diagnosis change, and another 33 to 35% of the time the treatment regimen changes.
Mm.
So on average, it's about 50% of the time the initial diagnosis or treatment is changed.
Okay.
And that should tell you everything you need to know. You know this. I've got 6,000, almost 500 days of oral chemo now, and over 600 days of IV chemo. But I'm
Mm.
here because of that. And the only reason, but that's a protocol that would have never been accepted without the person being the world's expert in it. John, I mean,
So you have a family motto and it's in your DNA. And yet any of us who have ever gone through chemo or love someone who has knows that it is unbearable. And when you've been through as much of it as you have, it's easy and understandable if someone wants to wave a white flag.
well,
Besides the
here's
family motto, man, what keeps you going forward?
the thing. There are two primary things that cause problems, I believe, and it goes into the longevity issue, is cancer fatigue syndrome and chemo brain. Okay. CCRI and cancer fatigue. Well, if you're not fatigued, it means you'll get out of that lazy boy or that bark lounger and do things. Okay. And if your mind still works, you can do things. And the minute you improve the quality of life and get rid of the side effects,
Right.
it changes everything. Because then you're living a quality of life for as long as you've got, that's the life you want to live. And
Mm.
people don't quit. So the most important thing I think is to address those issues. And again, I had narcolepsy diagnosis, and it was legit. I was falling asleep in meetings, and I mean, I take a medicine now that addresses that, and my mind's just as sharp as it was beforehand, maybe sharper because I'm listening better.
I'm curious because you also turn to projects that turn you on for life. And one of them is laying below a dark sky and looking up. And what is it that you found in looking up at a dark sky that teaches you about suffering, about recovery, about healing, about life?
I love eclipses. The thing about eclipses is when you're shooting them, you really don't get to experience them much. But the night after every eclipse is a new moon, which means it's pitch black. And it means that you'll see the stars and how many there are out there. People have seen a couple of my Milky Way pictures. I don't show a lot of them, but because everybody wants to see the eclipse pictures. But one person estimated well over 1 million stars in one picture. And you look up at that and you can see it when you're taking the pictures because you're using a wide angle lens. And if you don't believe there's more to life than what we're doing and a lot of the silliness that we approach on this earth, something's wrong with you. You have to understand how beautiful it is. And it just settles you. I mean, it's just amazing. So there's been an evolution for me. And that's part of the neatest thing that's happened to me is I've got 3 kids and then I've got one grandson. And Sam and I are close. I mean, and we're going to get closer soon because we're going to look a lot closer. But Sam has rules. One of his rules with his parents is that neither one of them can come visit me without taking him.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, that gives you something else to live for because you get the chance to make memories. And to give you an example of that, during the early right before Vietnam got big, my dad was in a meeting at Fort Benning, and the chief of staff of the Army was in the meeting. It was my dad's unit. We were talking, and my mom called up and said my dog had been sick for a while. I was old. That's the only dog I'd ever known. And he died that morning, and I was at school. And yeah, my mom picks me up from school, and my dad, it's reported to me, has said that he had to go to a meeting at about 10 o'clock in the morning. He had to leave the chief of staff of the Army. And he turned the meeting over to his XO. And he came home, picked me up, and took me out and bought me a new puppy and then took me home. Now, this is a guy, a warrior. What he went through in World War II and then Korea, I can't imagine.
Right.
And he takes time off from his career to go take his son to get a new puppy.
Mm.
And it taught me one thing. I said this, something I'll never forget. But the other thing was, no matter how much of a tough guy my dad was with me, I knew the rest of his life that he loved me. So last year, Sam's mom calls me up, and Sam's dog was 17 years old when he died last year. And I told my daughter, you go get Sam, go get him a puppy. She said, Dad, that's ridiculous. I didn't tell her the story. She'd never heard it. So I hunted and found one just like Benton was at the rescue. And I called her and said, I found it. And she said, Dad, you just stop with this, okay? I said, Beth, listen, I told her the story. I said, at the conclusion of it, I said, now you have a chance to make a memory, a multi-generational memory, and you can carry on my memory. And she got Sam and got her husband, and they hunted and found the right dog. And she later told me it was one of the best pieces of advice I'd ever given her. But that means I'm lucky, though, because I had great parents.
Mm.
And so the reason I'm able to do what I do today is in large part because I had great parents. I was sort of blessed that way.
And you just did a beautiful job talking about your grandson, about your dog, about your family, about your parents, about your service, about his service, about loss, about life. And what led into all of that was you looking up at a dark sky and seeing 1 million stars. And there's a quote from one of your books. I wrote it down. I wrote down more than we could talk about on this call, but this one was great. So tell me what you mean by this. The universe has a way of making our problems feel both smaller and more meaningful.
Okay, our problems are real. Okay, and the solutions a lot of times are easy. What's hard is we all worry about the side effects, know, the ancillary damage. But when you look at the stars at night and you see how the depth of it, you start seeing the clouds in the sky when those are really millions of stars that form that one cloud. I mean, you start thinking about it and you say, oh my gosh, what's going on? And it makes you realize how small we are, how small our planet is. Now, that doesn't change how important things are for you and your family. They
Right.
are important, and you got to take care of them. On my rule about putting a smile on somebody's face every day, there are a couple of rules. I said, first off, we must all give hope for a better yesterday. We can't change it. We can change the future, but we can't change yesterday. I'm putting a smile on somebody's face every day. If you change one person's life, you can change history. And one thing that's not new, but in all the businesses I've run or owned or anything, we have a question I want everybody to ask themselves on the way home from work every day. And that's, what did I do today to make somebody's life better or their job easier?
Yeah.
When you start being able to ask yourself that question, you're going to start making other people's lives better. And that changes everything. It puts things in perspective. We all have problems. Everybody's got problems. But when you have other people who help you and help you solve problems, that's the wonderful addition in life. And that's where you become content. I concluded about 2 years into my cancer that I was probably the most content I could ever be. Didn't mean I didn't have a lot more things to do, but I knew I'd done the right things after I was diagnosed.
Well, there's going to be folks listening to our podcast they've just hung up the phone from that diagnosis and their mind is spinning and they're not sure which way is up anymore. They're not sure what to do next. So when you speak to them and you're speaking to them right now, what encouragement or advice would you give them? What's their next right step?
This happened last week, and the guy's got pancreatic and liver cancer. And I had the privilege of telling him that his survival rates had gone up dramatically. So instead of having a 2% chance of living, he probably had a 10% chance. But I said, there's somebody there who gets the 10%. That's a human being. And I said, take care of your family. Understand that the person who has this the hardest is not you,
Hmm.
it's your caregiver. And nobody thinks about them. They all think about you, but nobody thinks about the member of your family who's taking care of you, helping you, can't solve the problem. They've got an insolvable problem for themselves. And if you love them and show them your love and don't view it as a pity party, but you view it as an opportunity to help, it changes everything for you. You're going to increase your likelihood of survival. You're going to increase the likelihood of having a high quality of life and understanding that every day is a gift. And when I first got diagnosed, I read an article by a gentleman, and he had my cancer and it lasted 6 months. And before he died, he wrote a thing that said how lucky he was. And I'm sitting here saying, how lucky you are. You got to be kidding me, dude. I mean, you're dying in 6 months and you're how lucky. He said, yeah, he had 6 months to make his relationships whole. He wasn't like his friends who had died in Vietnam or died in a car wreck or died in a heart attack. He had 6 months to do things right and to
Right.
try to make the family better. And when you look at it that way, you'll understand that every day is a gift.
Mm.
And every day we should approach it that way.
Pretty good way to die. Pretty good way to live, man. Glenn, it's great advice. We have 7 questions that we leverage to ask all of our survivors and fighters and photographers and authors and overcomers like you are, man. So they're called the Live Inspired 7. And the very first question is, I know you're very well read, so this one will be tricky for you, but what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Um, this is going to be kind of different. Winds of War and War and Remembrance, Herman Walk's book about the prelude to World War II.
Why'd you say that? Why that one?
It showed the complexity of our lives. It showed the sacrifices that were required by everybody. He's a forgotten author, but he wrote the book called Exodus too. And, after the aftermath of World War II and the founding of the state of Israel. What I came away from that was don't be judgmental.
Hmm.
I mean, eliminate judgment from your life. because you have never walked in that person's shoes.
What's one positive characteristic, one brilliant trait that you possessed as a young boy that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
I was told when I was a little boy, all the way through the time I left the law firm, that I had the attention span of an adolescent fruit fly. What it meant was I was curious.
Right.
And that curiosity has served me incredibly well. And the one thing I've learned to complement that is patience and be patient with yourself, because when I get upset these days, it's upset with myself because I've missed something or haven't done something right. But my little guy was very much innocent, and I went to 12 schools growing up, and I thought that was normal, but it gave me other skills. And I missed a lot of things, but it gave me other skills. So there is balance in the end.
If your home caught fire today and all living things were out and you have an opportunity of running back in and grabbing one item physically, what's that one physical thing you'd come racing back outside with?
I don't think you can see it, but there's a picture over my fireplace that my grandmother, my dad's mom, painted. And it's of a scene in Montana where my grandfather and grandmother lived. And there's a wagon there and aspen trees, and there's a bicycle leaned up against a tree. That's my bicycle.
Hmm.
And the wagon is where my dad's dad and I would talk. And that's the most important possession in this house.
Wow. If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day, whether in Jackson or Atlanta or anywhere else in the world, and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
That's hard because there are two people that come to mind, George Washington and Colin Powell.
What advice would you give yourself at age 20?
I got it from Ray Daniel. Learn how to get along. Your true success is not you being successful. Your true success is when you create something that lets groups of people get successful. One of the great stories is one of the companies that I was one of the founders of that went public. We had, like a lot of the companies, we had young CEO,
Yes.
and the young CEO was very difficult to work with because he was bounced around. So we got this incredible executive assistant for him, and she got stock options. And when the company went public, about 18 months later, I resigned from the board before we went public. But I got a phone call from her that said she'd quit and she sold her stock, and she had 20 million bucks net from her stock. And she wanted to apologize to me for doing that because she knew I had been instrumental in getting her a lot of the stock. And I just started laughing. I said, "What are you going to do now?" She said, "Raise my grandbabies."
Hmm.
And I said, "That's the best business day I've ever had in my life." Still just smile every time I think about it. But we would not have been successful without her. And she got what she deserves. And that is such a rare event
Hmm.
in business. I mean, I just love it. Every time I think about it, I start smiling.
Glenn Sturm, rainmaker, attorney, pilot, soldier, officer, photographer, author, and a whole lot of other job titles, including grandpa. It has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
One thing I've asked people to make sure I'm doing is that when I die, if they say I was a good man, a good guy, it'll mean it was a success. I did my dad's eulogy, and I said, I'll never be half the man my dad was because I've never been tried like he was.
Hmm.
I mean, imagine what he went through. But if you're a good person, a good guy, and that's my objective. It's not about money. It's about being a good human being and trying to help others become better human beings.
Glenn Sturm was a good human being, and whether fighting for his nation or fighting cancer taught the rest of us that we can do likewise too. And Glenn, I want to thank you for your life story. I want to thank you for getting a diagnosis of 2 years until you die. And here you are moving toward your second decade of teaching others how to really live. It's an inspiring story, man.
Thank you. I'm blessed, though. I'm just so blessed.
My friends,
I,
that's part of a life story. It's a reminder, though, that it's time for us to start living our life story. Don't wait. Don't complain it away. Don't wish it away. Embrace the gift of today. It's all you got. So for this time, And until next time, my name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift. Live with your soul on fire.